The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Good morning, everyone. You're listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. And we're going to continue now our reading and discussion of the book Rome and Civil Liberty by the Protestant historian James Aitken Wiley, J.A. Wiley. And we concluded at the bottom of page 149 yesterday, and I would like to refresh our memories a bit before we continue this morning. Remember, in the name of religious toleration, Great Britain allowed the papacy to begin setting up his own system of government in the country, and he allowed the Romanists to build 1,000 churches in England. So Britain bent over backwards to make Roman Catholics feel like citizens of the country. And when they did, they just simply took over, let the Pope establish his own government, began to divide and conquer the nation and return it to Romanism. That's a matter of historical fact. That's not a debatable issue. And England just sought a bit of reciprocity and suggested maybe the building of one Protestant church in the Roman state. Well, the papacy rejected that because Protestantism had already demonstrated at the time of the Protestant Reformation, when Protestantism began to flourish in Europe, the papacy lost his control. The papal hegemony was destroyed. It was nearly the death of the Pope's government in all of Europe. He lost the whole continent. And just allowing the building of one Protestant church in the Roman states would have represented to the Pope, and did represent to the Pope, a direct threat to his papal hegemony in his own land. So the answer was given before the proposition was even made formal. No, you shall not build a church here. You shall not offer worship here, because your very presence represents a threat to the papal hegemony, the papal government. And so we can come to no other conclusion but that while Rome demands toleration in a Protestant nation, not only toleration but equality, and to participate in the government of a Protestant land, and to eventually take over the land through those means, Rome won't reciprocate. Rome is intolerant of other religions. Intolerance is Romanism. Romanism is intolerance. Because the Roman Catholic Church is both a church and a state. If you allow another church, and particularly if that church is, the head of that church is Jesus Christ himself, then you are a direct threat to the papal hegemony. That's the difference between Christ and Antichrist. They cannot tolerate one another. They are never to be united. This is the age-old battle that began even in heaven when Lucifer rebelled. Lucifer has his quote-unquote Christian church. It's the Roman church, and it cannot tolerate the Church of Jesus Christ. The two cannot exist in peace very long. One, to its grievous error, is tolerant of the other. Protestantism, as was demonstrated in Britain and in the Protestant America today, is tolerant of intolerance, that somehow wishes to unite Christ and Antichrist. That's what the ecumenical movement, Vatican Council II, was all about. And it's just simply not going to work. Truth is never going to prevail when we're serving two masters. It wouldn't prevail in England. It's certainly not going to prevail here. It didn't prevail in Europe at the time of the Protestant Reformation. One had to go, and the Pope had to go. Okay? And he did go, and now he's on the rise again. He was on the rise in Britain in 1850, and he's essentially risen to power in this country today in our generation. But Rome would simply not allow a Protestant church to be built, although it demanded equality in England, in Protestant England, and to build 1,000 churches, and then to demand that the government, that is Protestant tax dollars, support that Roman system. And that Roman system should be the governor of all the people, not just Roman Catholics, but Protestants as well. Anybody who lived within a diocese of the Roman Catholic Church in Britain were subjects of the bishop, the Roman Catholic bishop. Now, James A. Wiley understood all of this and was trying to convince the Protestant people of England that their tolerance was really the nurturing of intolerance. And we take the same advice today from James A. Wiley. Now, given the historical record that Rome was intolerant of any mention of building a Protestant church, the author continues in the last two lines on page 149. He says, but argues the organ of the Romanists, which is the tablet, the official Roman Catholic publication of the time, toleration is the law of Britain. Never mind that intolerance is the law in the Roman state. You can't even think of building a Protestant church in the Roman state. Rome is intolerant of any competition with the papal hegemony. But toleration is the law in Britain. And we members of the Church of Rome, we Roman Catholics, claim the benefit of your law. In other words, it's the law. Toleration is the law. It's the constitutional foundation of this British Empire that it shall be tolerant of Romans. And we demand our rights, our constitutional right to practice our religion. But he says, but as no such law exists in the Roman states, no such law as toleration, it is unreasonable, impertinent, and stupid to demand such a thing there. No one could do so but a quote-unquote self-sufficient Anglican heretic. In other words, a Protestant. No one would be so stupid as to think to build a non-Roman Catholic church in Rome except a Protestant. Okay? Now, where do you think we stand with Romans? That you being a Protestant, me being a Protestant, where do you think we stand among Romanists? They are intolerant of us. Remember in Vatican Council II, they didn't even dare call us churches. they said flat out, you are not churches in the proper sense because you don't have full fellowship with the Roman See. And so, in abject demonstration of their intolerance of our Protestantism, they said that we were not churches in the proper sense, but we would be called ecclesial communities. Ecclesial communities. Now, look, anybody with any common sense or any knowledge of history at that point would have broken off discussions with the papacy. Our participation in Vatican Council II would have ended abruptly. We would have walked out in protest. But isn't that what our name represents? Protest? Protestantism? But no, we stayed in negotiation with the Roman Church, which is not a church at all. We didn't stand up for Christ. We didn't proclaim at Vatican Council II that Christ and Christ alone is the head of the church. That would have been the Protestant thing to do at Vatican Council II. But instead, we stayed and kept negotiating with this man of sin in Rome, accepting our label as quote-unquote separated brethren and ecclesial communities. Can anybody construe out of that anything in the shape or form of tolerance? Rome is just as intolerant of non-Roman Catholics today as she ever was. And she hides her intolerance by confusing language, which ought not to confuse anyone. No law exists in the Roman states called tolerance. And when Romanism gets control in this country, there'll be no tolerance for Protestantism. There's not now any tolerance for Protestantism. He says, but we claim benefit of your law, your constitutional law in Britain and in the United States called religious liberty. We Romanists are going to exercise our constitutional right of religious liberty until such time as we gain control of the government, and then we can have religious liberty without any competition whatsoever from Protestantism, from heresy. He says, but as no such law exists in the Roman states, it's unreasonable and impertinent and stupid to demand such a thing as tolerance there. No one could do so but a self-sufficient Anglican heretic. That's what it said in the tablet, the official Roman Catholic publication. Now, such a defense strongly reminds us of what might be supposed to pass between an honest man and a rogue. A rogue. You profess to act upon the principles of equality and fair dealing, might the latter say. You recognize the rights of others and have avowed your resolution to be scrupulously guided by them in all your transactions, and hitherto you have honorably supported your character. In other words, you've given us all the liberty we need, we Romanists. You've held true to your liberties, your sense of equality and liberality and tolerance. And we're going to take advantage of it, says the Romanist. And hitherto you have honorably supported your character of tolerance. Therefore, I make bold to claim my rights from you, but you are very far from being entitled to urge the same claim in return. In other words, if you come to a Roman state, don't expect toleration in a Roman state, you heretic. We're going to take advantage of the rights, the constitutional rights that you unwisely put in your Constitution, and we're going to practice our religion. We're going to divide up your land into dioceses. We're going to put governors, governors over all of the land. We're going to demand that you allow us to build infinite churches, and then we're going to expect you to finance the salaries of our priests in our churches and in our colleges and schools, and support our nunneries with your tax dollars, with your Protestant tax dollars. We expect you to open up the Speaker of the House of Lords to the possession of a Roman Catholic. We expect you to make the governors of this land in your civil government equally Roman Catholic with the Protestants until we can overthrow you by passing our laws. But don't come to a Roman state and expect anything like that, you heretic. Am I making the point? I mean, sometimes James A. Wiley's language is a bit hard to interpret since it's English and not American English. And he has different sentence structure and uses words that we don't use anymore. But I can make it plain to you what he's trying to drive across. He says, but you are very far from being entitled to urge the same claim of reciprocity or tolerance in return. I do not profess to be an honest man. I recognize no rights on the part of quote-unquote others. It is known to the world that I cheat and tyrannize and take the advantage whenever I have the opportunity. And were you not self-sufficient, impertinent, and a blockhead to boot, you would never come to me with so unreasonable a demand as to have liberty, equality, reciprocity, tolerance. He says, not one whit less preposterous is the defense of the tablet. Okay? Rome didn't mince any words in the official Roman Catholic publication. Now, if England would have had any sense, it would have gone to war against this papal aggression. What happened to their Protestantism? Something has damaged the Protestantism of Great Britain. Why would Great Britain tolerate such intolerance by those who demand tolerance, even at the cost of overthrowing the government and imposing a foreign potentate over every man, woman, and child in the country? And what excuse do we have here in this country for allowing the same thing to happen right under our noses with not a word of protest? This is just amazing to me that this history is not taught in our churches, that it's not taught in our schools. If the schools of the public school system were to promote the quote-unquote democratic form of government or republican form of government and liberty and equality, why would they ever fail to mention the intolerance of Romanists? Why would not the citizens of this country be aware of this history and learn at least to vote against Roman Catholic governors and legislators and judges, when history has repeatedly warned us that there is no tolerance in popery, that it is their moral duty to overthrow any and every government that fails to conform to Roman Catholic canon law and shuns the temporal and spiritual power of the Pope. I mean, if there's a subject that really fits the term national security, why isn't there a department of our government seeking out and evicting people in this country for promoting popery in the United States of America? Why are not the Romanists considered to be the terrorists? Why is it in a Protestant country that Protestants are suspected by the government of being undermining of the government? Why, it's because of the Roman influence in Washington, D.C. Where's the Protestant influence? You know, when Pope John Paul II came to speak to the European Parliament, there was one brave Protestant named Ian Paisley who stood up with a placard, a big sign, and printed upon it was Antichrist. And he stood up with that sign on his chest and he shouted in the hearing of everyone in that room, Antichrist! Antichrist! And guess who was hustled out of the chamber? Ian Paisley. Ian Paisley was taken out and arrested. Where is the Protestantism? But the Romanist argues, you're no subject of the Roman government who present these claims. We acknowledge with profound gratitude that we are not. Okay? Rome says we're not subjects of the Roman government. And James A. Wiley says we acknowledge with profound gratitude that we are not. Alas, had we the misfortune to be so, that is, members of the Roman government, in other words, card-carrying Roman Catholics, our choice would be a very plain one. Either we would worship the Virgin or occupy an underground vault in the Inquisition. That's your choice as a Romanist. Where's the tolerance in that? You realize the Bible talks about all the martyrs of Jesus who suffered at the hands of Rome? And in one other place it says the righteous perish and none perceive it. None taketh it to heart. That's our lot as Protestants. When the righteous perish, when the Protestant perishes, the world doesn't take it to heart. The Bible says when they kill us, they think they do God's service. Who is it that kills us? All you have to do is look to history. A history that is completely ignored in the churches today, completely ignored in the schools today, completely ignored by the mainstream and the alternative media in this country. Oh, they'll talk about Muslims till the cows come home, but they won't mention a word about the history of a worse religion than Islam. And we don't protest. You know, the Islamic faith has a saying, either the Quran or the sword. You either take the Quran or we lop off your head. But nobody dare mention the fact that Rome is just the same dogma. It's the same thing. And it has at least 600 years more history in the world than Islam. But I keep getting asked all the time. Tom, you talk all the time about the Roman Catholic Church. What about Islam? Islam is the threat. Why do you talk about Rome? Why do you talk about the Pope and the Catholic Church? The terrorists are Islamists.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, continuing with the last full paragraph on page 150, if you're following along. He says, but argues the Romanist print, that is the tablet, quote, you are not subjects of the Roman government who present these claims, unquote. We acknowledge with profound gratitude, says James A. Wiley, that we are not. Alas, had we the misfortune to be so, to be Roman Catholics, our choice would be a very plain one, either to worship the Virgin or occupy a subterranean vault in the Inquisition. But what has this to do with the matter? Were it a demand for civil rights, citizenship might relevantly be deemed indispensable. But this is a demand, not for a civil right, but a natural one. Permission to worship our Creator, and to entitle every creature to this right. It is enough that we wear the human form and possess a human conscience. Under the government of heaven, this right is possessed by all. But under the government of heaven's vicar, that is the Pope, it is not so. But if citizenship is to be the basis of the matter, alas, the validity of the rights of the Romanists. Can they be subjects of Britain? They have of late been declaring in the most plain and unmistakable terms that they cannot. With a frankness that lays us under obligations, they say they will no longer be mealy-mouthed, that a divided allegiance they cannot render, that the command of the Pope is the command of God, that the laws of the British Parliament are not laws but lies, that they are not to be obeyed but spit upon, that they are to be rigorously violated, that the Queen is the enemy of 10 millions of Roman Catholic subjects, most affectionate, most loyal, most patriotic subjects, these Romanists. If the right to toleration rests on the fact of being subjects, verily the right of the Romanists to toleration is somewhat ambiguous. And I will add the words to put it mildly. But one strong reason is as good as 20, and sometimes better. And the tablet might have settled the question conclusively on this last proposition, which is that our religion cannot be tolerated, because it is not a religion but heresy. We poor heretics who wish to set up as the tablet in diction as eloquent as the Spirit is charitable, affirms we intend doing the abomination of desolation within the city of God, with the avowed object of damning the souls of Romans, instead of taking offense because the Holy Father refuses to take part in our impious design by granting us toleration, ought rather to be profoundly thankful that he does not repeat the experiment of the Babylonian monarch on the plain of Dura, build a vast furnace in the Campania, heat it sevenfold, and assemble all the British Protestants of his dominions, compel them to fall down and worship or do penance in his furnace. This was the only toleration granted to Protestantism anciently, and it is the only toleration, say Romanists, which they will grant to Protestantism whenever they have the power of doing thus as they list. That's history. Consistent, predictable history. Whenever Rome has the power, she kills God's people. Romanism is intolerance. And when a nation seeks toleration for Roman Catholics, they are abetting intolerance. That was the lesson hardly learned by England, and that will be the lesson most hardly learned by the United States of America. He says, religious toleration, then, Rome is most willing to reciprocate with all the world. But how is this thing to be done? It is a plain and manifest impossibility. No one has any religion but herself. And how can she reciprocate religious freedom with those who have no religion at all? This is like asking one to exchange good money for counterfeit. The blame then is not hers. Let the world grow religious. That is, let it embrace the religion of Rome, and she will reciprocate toleration with all the earth. That we should enjoy at Rome the same religious rights with Romanists enjoy in Britain, plain and equitable as the thing may appear to us, is a truly monstrous idea. And the fact that we should entertain it for a moment can be accounted for only, the tablet assures us, on the supposition that our Protestantism and our self-conceit have so disordered our reason that we are incapable of distinguishing betwixt things that differ. It's a foregone conclusion that you must tolerate Romanists wherever they exist. You must surrender your nation to the Romans because they're the only ones who have religion. And your religion is no religion at all. And you should not think to expect toleration in a Roman state. And when the world becomes Roman, there'll be a global inquisition against Bible-believing, God-fearing, true Christians. The future bodes nothing more but the same as history with regard to Romanism. Now, do you think we ought to get all sweaty about the Muslims? But they're going to convince us, come hell or high water, no matter what it takes, they're going to convince us, even if they have to hire a bunch of Arab people, they're going to convince us that it's the Islamists that we have to worry about. And they'll find passports from Arab-speaking Muslims in flames, somehow survived. They'll have faces splattered all over the mainstream media of the Muslim terrorists that did thus or so in the United States of America. And we must have martial law and lock down our borders to keep the Muslims out. And the United States is going to buy it hook, line, and sinker just like they did at 9/11. There's only one thing that's not tolerated in the United States of America, and that's the truth. The truth is not tolerated in this country. We're so deluded, so confused, so lied to, so propagandized that we can't see our nose on our face. Only the Bible and history can be relied upon. If the Bible's not the basis for your research, then you're going to believe the Islamists are the ones we need to fear. If the Bible is the basis for your understanding, then you know that under a million disguises, Rome is our greatest enemy. Now, James A. Wiley is going to give us a for instance. This instance, I took a little time to research for myself. And this is a perfect demonstration of what it's like to live in a Roman state where there is no challenge from Protestants. This is the case of a family called the Madii, all right? It's entitled The Madii, or the Inquisition in the 19th Century. This is a family of Bible-believing Christians. The Madii family. A man and his wife and his children. They were guilty of absolutely no crime. They lived impeccable lives as witnessed by all surrounding them. They were a virtuous family beyond any criticism. And they were guilty of one crime. And that is of reading the Bible. Now, James A. Wiley says the buildings of the Holy Office, that is, the name under which the Inquisition was named for a while, the Holy Office. The full title of it was the Holy Office of the Inquisition. It was a department within the Holy See that routed out heretics. It was his business. It was the business of the Holy Office of the Inquisition to rout out heresy from the land. Is there such a thing in your church? No, only the Roman Catholic Church. It says the buildings of the Holy Office at Rome were closed by the French. But wherever the Church of Rome is dominant, there is the Holy Office. As an illustration of this working in our own day, we select the case of the Madii. There was an atrocious coolness, a wanton and impolitic cruelty about this transaction, which will make it memorable when some of the blacker and guiltier deeds of the papacy shall have been forgotten. The demeanor of the accused, the Madii, so beautifully quiet and unobtrusive, quote, till persecution dragged them into the flame, unquote. Their unimpeachable and blameless conduct in all matters touching the laws of man, and the notoriety of the fact that they were apprehended, arraigned, and condemned solely on matters appertaining to, quote, the law of their God, unquote, give a special character to this crime and make it one of the truest illustrations which ever our times have produced of the spirit of Romanism. It has most unceremoniously given the lie to all the fine apologies and fair excuses its friends were framing for its past excesses. Popery had become, they assured us, very repentant, and had made a, quote, long, last, irrevocable vow of reformation, unquote. It had laid aside that dreadful apparatus of racks and screws by which it enlightened the consciences and tore the bodies of men in the past ages. The tiger's heart had been plucked out of it, and a man's heart had been given to it. No doubt of it, exclaimed the public, who, imposed upon by the sheep's clothing, had begun to fondle the monster and to call it a harmless lamb, and to rate history soundly for having lied so foully upon it. These credulous persons, Popery has done its best to undeceive. It befits it to preach charity in the pulpit of Westminster. Okay? In a Protestant nation, the Roman Catholic priest preaches charity, love, right? It is, too, a well-dressed and well-behaved thing on the streets of London and Edinburgh. You see, when Rome is in a minority, she's meek as a lamb, right? Appears to be truly Christian. He continues, he says, it knows full well that as yet, whatever may be the case 20 years hence, British law is superior to canon law, and that simpletons must be hoodwinked and their suspicions laid to rest till Popery is in the circumstances to deal more decidedly by them. But look at it in its Tuscan lair. Okay? In England, Romanists were meek as a lamb, pleading upon the guilty consciences of Protestants. We just want religious liberty. You've taken away all of our liberties. And the liberal hearts, the Protestant hearts of Britain were sympathetic. Okay? And they began to abet intolerance by supporting Romanism, sympathizing with Romanism. And the Pope answered them. He just came in and took over. But what about the fair speech of the Romanists when they're in the minority? Can they be trusted? When they appear so meek as a lamb? so abused by society, denied their natural rights. What does it look like in Tuscany, where Rome is not challenged? In a purely Roman Catholic country, what takes place in a truly Roman Catholic country? Excuse me. James A. Wiley says, but look at it in its Tuscan lair, in Tuscany, where it is neither muffled nor muzzled. Romanism is neither muffled nor muzzled in Tuscany. It's a Roman Catholic country. The Pope rules supreme. There's no Protestant protest, and she can do as she pleases. What does she do in Tuscany? He says, there as of old, its footprints are tracked in blood. There it knows not to show pity on anyone who come within its power. There it has not recanted so much as one of those tyrannical and bloody dogmas which stand written in eternal characters on the infallible pages of the canon law. To all Rome's loudly vaunted professions, which simpletons believe, and knaves affect to believe, we oppose the plain, unvarnished history of the Madii. In 1848, light broke upon the capital of Tuscany. The political troubles were followed by a religious revival, and the Roman Catholic priesthood began to adopt severe measures to prevent the circulation of tracts and Bibles, which now began to be inquired after by the Florentines. The light of the gospel finally arrived in Tuscany. And what did Rome instantly do? Impose the Inquisition to persecute Bible believers and those who were propagating the faith of Jesus Christ in opposition to the Pope of Rome. How does Rome behave in her own country, where she is unopposed? Should Protestantism even stick its big toe in the door, Rome goes on the hunt. It says, our readers will remember the apprehension and the banishment of Count Guicciardini. The arm of the church fell next upon the Madii and his wife. On the 17th of August of 1851, they were surprised by the police in what the church forbids as a crime, the reading of the Bible. The house was searched. Other Bibles and prayer books were discovered in it, and the family was instantly hurried off to prison, where they were condemned to the ordinary treatment of so good of the common inmates of a Tuscan jail. Rose Madii was immured in a small, unhealthy cell in the Borgello. She was separated from her husband, whom she was not permitted to see, not even for a few minutes. Her health quickly gave way. Her physician could make no representation of her condition, nor do anything for her relief, his visits being forbidden. The representative of the British Embassy, Mr. Scarlett, in vain petitioned for her release, offering bail in her behalf. The doors of the Tuscan Borgello would be opened, no, not even for the temporary respite of so great a malefactor. And poor Rose Madii was kept pining in confinement month after month. At the end of 9 long months, and 9 months in a dungeon is a long period of time, Rose Madii and her husband were brought up. There sat the judges in their robes, and there stood the prisoners in their chains. Their crime? What is it? Have they plotted conspiracy against the government? Have they joined in the revolution or been guilty of robbery or murder? That 9 dreary months of solitary confinement have already been endured by them, and yet, after all, they must abide their trial amid these dread forms of justice? No. They stand acquitted of all these crimes. The very tribunal that condemns them is careful to proclaim that they've committed no political offense, no civil wrong, that they're not even suspected of such things. What then is their crime? It is this: they have dared to open and read that blessed book in which is written heaven's message of salvation to a lost world. That it is so, we appeal to their judges themselves. The words of the indictment are as follows. Here's the indictment of the Madii family. Quote, on the evening of the 17th of August, 1851, the public force surprised 3 individuals who, along with a girl of 12 years of age, whom the Madii had received into their house for a short time, were occupied in the reading of the Bible translated by Diodati, having each a copy before them, that in the house of the said Madii were lodged not only different copies of the said Bible and others in English, and prayer books of the use of the heterodox, but various works besides of the same kind, and several copies of the same work, unquote. And again, quote, that on the 3rd female, who was little more than 12 years of age and unfurnished with religious instruction, they produced the effect of her abandoning her own religion and adopting that of her employers. This latter person, the Madii, took the trouble to teach to read, and thus rendered her capable of understanding the books which they supplied, viz., the Bible by Diodati, and others entitled The Book of Common Prayer, printed in London in 1848 by the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge, in which were found recorded the same maxims and doctrines condemned by the Church of Rome, doctrines which expressly assert that the existence of purgatory and the worship of images are foolish inventions, that in the sacrament of the Eucharist there is no real transubstantiation, and similar notorious heretical pravity indicated above, unquote. That was the indictment. And in the ears of Christ, how do you think was received that indictment? Do you see now the difference between Christ and Antichrist? They were guilty of taking in a little girl, 12 years old, probably a Roman Catholic, teaching her to read and giving her God's Word. That was the crime that they committed. That is the difference between Christ and Antichrist. They were not even suspected of any other crime than reading the Bible and sharing it with others. Now, James A. Wiley says, assassination and reading the Bible Rome ranks in the same category. For no sooner did conviction take place, indeed, the Madii boldly confessed the charge, than the sentence usually passed on assassins and similar malefactors was pronounced upon them. Francis Madii was condemned to 56 months in Volterra, the Cayenne of Italy, and his wife to 45 months in the Argostolo, the hulks for females. To this punishment were added the cost of their prosecution. Rose Madii heard with undaunted mind a sentence which the voice of the judge trembled to pronounce. And when it was ended, she erected her feeble frame, weakened by long confinement, turned to her husband, who rose at the same instant. The two smiled sadly on one another and tenderly embraced in presence of the court. And we'll finish the account of the reading of the story of the Madii on the program tomorrow. But you can see there is no toleration for God's book and God's people in the Roman house.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.